Falcons Flight is the tallest, fastest, and longest roller coaster ever constructed. This monumental attraction will open sometime soon, perhaps even later this year, alongside the brand new Six Flags Qiddiya City in Saudi Arabia. Falcons Flight absolutely shatters all previous coaster records, with a top speed of 155 miles per hour, an overall 640-foot change in elevation, a 607-foot tall curve climbing a cliff, a 531-foot tall camelback above ground level, and a ridiculous 13,943 feet of track. In a previous analysis video I made on Falcons Flight at the end of 2023, I took a guess at what I believed would be quite the monumental design risk built into Falcons Flight, and how the ride could utilize that design risk to its advantage to cycle more trains every hour and help move its line as fast as possible. And from newly surfaced testing footage, it looks like the design risk I dreamed about is a reality. And on top of that, there's another aspect of the ride that, when combined with this realized design risk, makes the entire concept of Falcons Flight even more absurd. In this video, let's nerd out over why Falcons Flight is even more ridiculous than you probably already imagined. If you enjoy this video as it plays, I kindly ask for your support by clicking the like button, as that goes a long way in the continuous fight against the YouTube algorithm. Without further ado, let's dive in. This design risk all ties in with the ride's third launch, which takes place on the lower half of the gigantic cliff drop. As the train enters the drop, it hangs up on a set of magnetic brakes, which may totally neuter the airtime of the element, but probably adds a moment of tension as you hang over the cliff, as well as a great opportunity to soak in the views. The train then dives into a large vertical drop before leveling off into a much more gradual descent. After passing through a tunnel, it's at this point where the third launch engages, as a long series of linear synchronous motors, or LSMs, boost the train alongside gravity to a top speed of 155.3 miles per hour, which sends the train up and over a jaw-dropping 531-foot tall camelback. Now, this third launch made me question many things about it, like what would happen if the ride control system faulted or an e-stop was triggered as a train was entering or traversing the third launch, as these situations would cause the third launch to abort. And LSM stators used on roller coasters are set up with a fail-safe configuration, making them act as magnetic brakes when they are not exhibiting a launch, unless you happen to be these stators at the top of Velocicoaster's top hat, but maybe that's a story for another video. So in these situations, not only would the train not receive the needed boost to ride over the hill, the LSMs would slow down the train also. This would cause the train to not ride over the camelback, and it would eventually valley to a stop at the base of the element. But then how does this train complete the circuit after a stop? Would it need to be craned from the track and reassembled in the maintenance building? Because of this, as well as the ride's manufacturer Intamin being known for their innovation, I guessed in my last video that the third launch could execute a swing launch of epic proportions, whereby launching the train forwards and backwards and gradually increasing the train's speed with each pass, it would gain enough speed to ride up and over the camelback and complete the layout. And thanks to Six Flags Qiddiya City and Lift Hills and Thrills on YouTube, we now have a complete example of a swing launch occurring. At first, it appears the launch is ever so slowly jogging the train forward, maybe just slightly up the camelback to a designated position. Then the first launch kicks in, and it appears only the lower LSMs in the base of the valley accelerate the train backwards partially up the third launch. After running out of speed, the train begins to roll back down the drop on gravity alone, and then is launched again by the lower LSMs at the base of the valley, which sends the train pretty high up the camelback, as it takes a long time for the train to coast up and then roll back down to ground. On this third pass, it looks like all of the stators on this third launch finally kick in and deliver a thunderous roar of power, just like how they sound on Red Force at Ferrari Land. Anyway, this thunderous launch sends the train nearly all the way up the cliff drop. After running out of speed just before the trims at the very top of the drop, the train then plunges back down nearly all of the cliff drop, and the LSMs kick in one last time, delivering a thunderous roar of power. And what was just a stationary train is now traveling 155 miles per hour, easily sending it over the tallest roller coaster element above ground level on Earth. I'll let the swing launch play again without my commentary, just listen to how powerful the LSMs are in the third and fourth passes. you have it. With just 4 passes through the third launch, Falcons Flight can fully recover a stopped train and give it enough speed to climb up and over this ridiculous hill. With the immense power of the system, I would assume the ride can recover a loaded train of riders also, and not just empty trains as we see in this example. I only say this because the flash vertical velocity at Six Flags Great Adventure, the first of Vekoma's new super boomerang coasters, can supposedly only rescue a stalled train if it is empty and thus lighter. So anytime a train valleys on flash, all riders must first be evacuated and then the train can be relaunched. But this is the only coaster I know of that's like this. And most roller coasters with the launch mid-ride like Velocicoaster at Islands of Adventure, which is also built by Intamin, have overbuilt launches and can fully recover stalled trains that are loaded with riders no problem. But you know what makes the self-rescuing swing launch even crazier? When trains ascend this ridiculous 531-foot tall camelback, it's not only the usual things like gravity, friction, and air resistance that slows down each train, there's actually a magnetic brake system to further slow down each train. These are actually copper fins that are sticking out of the track on the upper half of the ascent, and it looks like the majority of these brakes are not retractable, meaning that they will always brake the train. This is a lot of brakes on an uphill section. As the permanent magnets mounted beneath the trains pass by these metal fins, eddy currents are generated that slow down the vehicle. And this is absolutely insane for so many reasons. Like, imagine if King Naka at Six Flags Great Adventure, RIP, rode through a bunch of brakes on the way up its 456-foot tall top hat. Now, I know that Formula Rossa at Ferrari World, the previous world's fastest roller coaster at 149 miles per hour, rides through a long set of brakes following its launch, but its first hill is only 170 feet tall. We're talking about the tallest roller coaster element above ground level, but it turns out the train is launched far too fast into the element, so I guess it needs brakes. And I don't mean to cast hate on this concept, it's just so ridiculous for so many reasons. The developers of Qiddiya City wanted the world's fastest roller coaster, and with what seems like an unlimited amount of money, coupled with a ride manufacturer who historically will build anything you ask and more, this is how they made it happen. The ride is equipped with a ridiculous 11 megawatt energy storage system of supercapacitors, which is used to power the ride's 3 launches, as well as the incredible swing launch when needed. On the other hand, Red Force at Ferrari Land uses only a 3 megawatt energy storage system to assist with launching trains from nearly 0 to 112 miles per hour in 5 seconds. When the camelback was first constructed and we saw images of these fins, I thought they might be LSMs wrapped with a protective covering, as many of the other LSMs on the ride were also wrapped for protection. I thought that if the train needs to climb over a 531-foot tall hill, no way would you want to purposely slow down the train during its ascent. But even in these testing videos, we can see that the fins are still dark, and they match the color of the brake fins used at the top of the cliff drop as well as on the ride's final brake run. And if you listen really closely to the video of the swing launch, you can faintly hear the hum of magnetic braking as the train ascends the hill. It's like the sound of similar magnetic brake runs used on other Intamin coasters. So with trains being braked as they ascend the camelback, for one, it means that the swing launch is a lot more powerful than it would need to be otherwise, as the launch not only needs to build up enough speed for trains to naturally ride over the hill, but also ride through a large number of brakes. Top Thrill 2 at Cedar Point executes a swing launch with every cycle to get its trains up and over a 420-foot tall top hat. But the major difference is the train is not slowed down by brakes as it ascends the top hat, just the usual things like gravity, friction, and air resistance. With Falcons Flight, it also means that even during every cycle of the ride, Launch 3, which boosts trains to 155.3 miles per hour, is technically overkill, as it's enough speed for trains to ride over the hill while being slowed down by brakes. Originally, I figured the boost was for 2 reasons. The first was to best the 149 mile per hour top speed of Formula Rossa, and the second was to give trains enough speed to ride over the 531-foot tall hill. As with the fan curve at a height of 607 feet, it means the cliff drop itself is likely around around 590 feet. While that 640-foot figure is advertised a lot, keep in mind that that is the overall change in elevation of the coaster, which is likely the difference between the ride's tallest moment at 607 feet here, and then this moment here that crosses under the pathway into the park's entrance. But with the cliff drop likely being around 590 feet and the camelback at 531 feet, that's only about a 60-foot difference, which is almost nothing at the height and speed we're dealing with here. And let's not forget that there are breaks at the top of the cliff drop also, so it's like there's even less of a height difference. Thus, gravity alone is probably not enough to get the train over the hill, so the third launch is likely still needed for trains to ride over the camelback, but then the launch exceeds the necessary speed in order to secure the record, which I guess is what leads to the brake fins we have on the ascent of the hill. Now thankfully there are no trims on the drop of the camelback as we see here, so trains freely coast from the top of the camelback all the way to the ride's final brake run. Well, almost. There's actually brake fins at the crest of the final hill here that leads into the final brake run, but I think these brakes were always part of the ride's design, just like the brakes up the camelback, as the curve into the final brake run is way tighter than any of the other curves following the camelback. So unless that turn was purposely designed to deliver insane positive G's, it's likely because this final hill was actually designed into the ride as part of the final brake run. Now this also makes me wonder if the ride experience will be neutered because of the trims on the camelback. Like, what would happen if we remove those trims and trains were just allowed to haul ass over the top? I mean, the hill is absolutely gigantic and parabolic in design, and it would probably deliver sustained ejector airtime that would make El Toro's initial camelbacks look like a kiddie ride. And then the forces of the remaining hills and valleys would probably be insane. But I'm still assuming that the ride was designed and intended to run with these trim brakes. The good thing at least is that with fully loaded trains, they should be boosted to the same top speed in Launch 3, and then will carry more momentum up the camelback and will be less affected by the magnetic brakes. This should lead to slightly faster speeds over the camelback than we are seeing in these test videos, which are with empty trains. But regardless, now that we know the third launch is capable of recovering a stopped train at the base of the camelback, we still don't have an answer as to whether or not this launch will be used as its own block zone. For those of you who are unfamiliar, a block zone is a section of ride that only one train may occupy. At the end of a block zone is the method to stop a train in case the block zone ahead is still occupied. This is the safety system that prevents roller coaster trains from colliding with one another. So while the third launch can absolutely stop a train if needed, as well as get the train going again to complete the circuit, making it a true control point, it all depends if the ride is programmed to use Launch 3 to its full advantage and make it a separate block zone. In my previous video, I discussed that Falcons Flight could have a less aggressive block zone approach or an aggressive block zone approach. In this less aggressive block zone approach, we first start in the station area. Falcons Flight has a dual station, with each station track possessing 3 block zones. Based off some plan sheets, I initially thought that only the most forward zones would be where riders unloaded and loaded from the trains, but based off this new video, we can see a long exit ramp that seems to accommodate both of the middle zones in the station. And it seems like it would make for a perfect exit, as well as a place for ADA guests to make their way to the station and actually board and unload from the trains. So I'll now guess that the furthest zone in this video is the load station, the middle zone is now the unload station, and then the closest zone that we see here is just a hold position. So I'll rename the blocks to load left and load right, unload left and unload right, and then waiting left and waiting right. Also in this video, you can see the pipes that are part of the cooling system for the ride's wheels. This system will likely blast a ton of cold air at the wheels, and the piping is not only just in the loading zones but all 3 zones of the station, which means the entire time a train is inside the station building, its wheels should be getting cooled off. Going back to the blocks, we then have the transfer block, which is between the station and first launch, the Launch 1 block, which consists of the launch lift hill, the Launch 2 block, which consists of the initial ride following Launch 1 and the second launch up the cliff wall, ending with a 607-foot tall fan curve at the top of the cliff. When I first guessed at the ride's block zones, I did wonder if this flat section at the start of Launch 2 would actually divide that zone into 2 different blocks. But thanks to this image, we can see that there's only drive tires at the start of the flat track. So without a separate brake run before these drive tires, all of the track following the launch lift to the top of the fan curve has to be the same block, just as we see here in this nerdy diagram. Next is the cliff top block, which starts after the fan curve and ends with a brake run leading into the cliff drop. Then in our less aggressive setup, the remainder of the ride up until the final brake run, which includes launch 3 and the massive camelback, are all part of this long launch 3 block. Now this is quite the long block zone, and based off the ride's testing footage with an empty train, takes well over 60 seconds from when the train exits the trims on the cliff drop to when the train rounds the corner into the final brake run. Based off ML Design's pre-creation, I originally guessed that with this long zone, the ride could dispatch a train every 80 seconds at best, as a train would not be able to exit the cliff top block until the train ahead exits the final brake run in the launch 3 block. This equates to 45 trains cycling an hour, but with the ride's small 14-passenger trains would only yield an hourly throughput of 630 riders per hour. To stir the pot further, it appears that in the actual build out of the ride, there is no hardware set up on the straight track right before the cliff drop to create a control point. We do have some brake fins immediately before the drop as well as at the start of the drop, but there are no brake fins far enough in advance to slow the train prior to the drop, and no accompanying drive tires to act as a control point and physically stop the train. Without this hardware, the control system cannot stop a train on top of the cliff, and once a train rides over the fan curve, it will complete the section of track atop the cliff and then head down the cliff drop. Thus, the cliff top can no longer be counted as its own block, and it would instead join the already too long launch 3 block in our less aggressive approach, which now begins after the crest of the wave turn. This further increases the amount of time it takes for trains to traverse the ride's longest block zone by what looks to be about 30 seconds, based off this video of an empty train traversing that section of track. Now keep in mind, this is all an estimate until we see a full POV of the coaster, but this could mean trains will dispatch every 110 seconds at the least, as a train in the launch 2 block cannot actually execute launch 2 and head up the cliff until the train ahead has fully exited the final brake run in the launch 3 block. This equates to only 32 dispatches an hour, yielding 448 riders per hour. But if we use launch 3 to create a separate block zone, we can make a new launch 3 block starting at the crest of the wave turn and ending at the crest of the large camelback following the actual launch 3. And then the remainder of the ride becomes what I'll call the service brake block, which is from the crest of the camelback to the end of the final brake run before the station block zones. And I think this is the likely scenario, and that launch 3 will be programmed to create its own block. For one, we already see that launch 3 is more than capable of recovering a stalled train with the swing launch, even if the train rides through brakes going up the camelback. And even if the ride is not programmed to use launch 3 as a separate block zone, any faults or e-stop at the wrong time will cause trains to stop at launch 3. And I'm guessing this will happen pretty often, which will require the use of a swing launch to return the train to the station. And regardless, the hardware of launch 3 will need to be present here anyway. Plus, pretty much every modern roller coaster, including the ones built by Intamin, use mid-ride launches as control points to create separate block zones. So I think the only reason why Falcons Flight would not use launch 3 to create a separate block zone is simply because of its insane height and speed. But if launch 3 and its hardware needs to exist anyway, the system is more than capable of performing swing launches, and the ride will likely have to perform swing launches on the regular anyway due to regular ride faults. It may as well use launch 3 to create another block. Plus, even without a separate block at the top of the cliff, it actually makes far more sense to use launch 3 as a control point instead of at the top of a 600-foot tall cliff. Operationally, during any ride stops or periods of downtime, it would be much easier to respond to a train stopped near ground level at the base of launch 3 than 600 feet on top of a cliff. And from a maintenance and reliability perspective, launch 3 has to exist, so you may as well use it to its full advantage. And adding a control point to the cliff top only adds complexity to an already complex ride. A control point above the cliff would require many moving parts like drive tires and retractable brakes, as well as many proximity sensors. These components would need to be maintained and regularly checked, and would also cause periods of downtime, as even something like a proximity sensor above the cliff reading incorrectly could cause the ride to fault and shut down. And then a technician would need to take the long trek of road to the cliff top in order to troubleshoot and reopen the ride. And since the service brake is still the ride's longest block zone, that is still the limiting factor for capacity. So even without a separate cliff top block zone, using launch 3 to create a different block zone that incorporates incorporates the cliff-top track could mean that trains might be able to dispatch as soon as every 65 seconds. As with a train in the launch 2 block and a train ahead in the launch 3 block, it will give enough time for the train ahead in launch 3 to crest the camelback and enter the service brake block before the train in the launch 2 block reaches launch 2, allowing it to travel up the cliff. And then the train ahead should exit the service brake block before the train now in the launch 3 block actually reaches launch 3 itself, allowing launch 3 to engage and send the train up and over the camelback. This equates to about 55 dispatches an hour, which is about 770 riders per hour. In my original aggressive block zone approach, I also hoped for another block to be added to the final brake run similar to what is used on Velocicoaster's final brake run. On Velocicoaster, the first portion of brake run can fully stop a train if the block ahead is occupied, or it can slow a train to a quick jog, allowing it to exit the block much faster so that the next approaching train can more quickly enter launch 2. But based on this recent video of Falcons Flight's brake run, I'm not seeing the drive tires needed to create 2 separate blocks. I only see drive tires at the end of the slope track, right before the track switch into the dual stations. Whereas for 2 separate blocks, it would require additional drive tires further up the slope to create another control point. So it appears this massive final brake run will be just 1 block. So if we have 2 trains with one in the service block and one in the launch 3 block, if the train in launch 3 reached the 3rd launch before the train ahead fully exited service into one of the 2 waiting blocks, the 3rd launch would not activate and that train would come to a stop, requiring a swing launch to complete the circuit. Anyway, that will do it for this nerdy update video on Falcons Flight. Let me know your thoughts on the swing launch down below in the comments, as well as the ride overall. And hopefully you enjoyed my over-analysis of the ride's potential block zones. I'm looking forward to a real POV of the coaster where we might actually get a better look at not only the full ride experience, but how it will function and what its final block zones may look like. Anyway, thanks for watching and be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more nerdy content just like this. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.